So what are we doing out here today?
So I'm Brian Barnes with North Carolina Emergency Management, and what we're doing today is training our first responders on how to respond to flood emergencies, how to operate boats safely in flood environments.
Okay, and the Swiftwater part is really significant because
The hazards the water faces, people get comfortable around water because they grow up around it, but 1 cubic foot of water weighs over 60 pounds. So when that water is moving fast, it doesn't take a lot to push a car off the road. A couple inches of water can push a car off the road, and that's really one of the places we see most people die in floods.
that's nuts, 60 pounds.
Absolutely.
So, and then so a normal kind of flood environment where it's maybe up to, not normal, but like what we've seen recently, like 3 or 4 feet.
It can do tremendous damage on structures, and not just the water itself, but the water is generally contaminated. So there's all sorts of bad things in that water when it's going through, and can pose its own hazards, not even with the force of the water, but just the water itself.
Okay, and how long have you been doing this?
So I've been working for the state for 8 years, and I coordinate the emergency services program for the state of North Carolina, and we look to find ways to ensure that we can train our responders, because our concern when we send them out is making sure they get home at the end of the day. They obviously get put out in some very dangerous environments and asked to do a lot at all hours of the day and night, and they need to be prepared for that.
Yeah, and it's not just North Carolina. You said you guys work all over the world?
Absolutely. We have relationships with folks from across the country, across the world. We just hosted an exercise here a couple of weeks ago with partners. We had 513 responders from 3 or 4 different countries and 3 or 4 other states, as well as responders from across the state. And it's about those relationships and partnerships that make us successful in big disasters.
And are you seeing Swiftwater emergencies rise?
I think there's been an increase in events, obviously in North Carolina, but across the country and the world. You see flooding as a hazard that's faced across the world, and it doesn't matter where you're at, what country you are, whether you're in the deserts, the mountains, or the coast, it all is a hazard that you face.
Yeah, and what are the main things that you find yourself having to rescue people from? Like, what are the main causes?
One of the biggest problems we see with folks is trying to drive across a flooded street, and we understand it may be the only way home and they haven't been home, or they need to check on their dogs or stuff like that, but just a couple inches of rain or a couple inches of water is enough to push them off the road, and that's really where most folks die in a flood.
When you say, because in my mind, without thinking much about it, I think that the only way you're in danger is if you're crossing a bridge where it's flooded, because then it can push you into the water, which is what I see in the movies.
Yes, ma'am.
But where are the other places it can happen?
So it can happen anywhere. So anywhere the water's running across the road, it's not just the water itself, but it a lot of times will undercut the road. So it may look like it's a road there, but it not be. And when you try to drive across it, it falls apart and sweeps you off the road into the water.
Wow.
And that situation can rapidly happen. It doesn't take very much water at all. And then you get swept off the road. And we see that time and time again. In Hurricane Matthew, 25% of the fatalities were drowning in a vehicle.
Oh my goodness.
And that was really a frustrating thing for us.
That's horrifying.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so people just not even getting the hazard of this.
Yes, and we get it that people want to go home, they want to be with their family, their friends, or need to go to work or whatever else, but they don't understand the risk they're putting not only to themselves, but also the responders that are coming to get them.
Right. And generally speaking, you mentioned earlier, it's a very risky job.
Absolutely, and when we send out responders, our biggest concern is making sure they all go home at the end of the day. We have paid and unpaid professionals from across the state that deploy at a moment's notice to go help folks in their time of need, and we want to make sure they get back to their families at the end of the day. And when the public doesn't take unnecessary risk, they help ensure that happens.
Right. And was it that your #1 event that's happened here was Hurricane Florence?
Hurricane Florence was the biggest response we've had. As far as the estimated dollar loss, is Hurricane Floyd and Hurricane Matthew combined, greater than that, which is our new storm of record, which is not records we want to be breaking, but it just shows you the great impact that happened during that storm.
And what did you guys end up seeing in that?
So during Hurricane Florence, we deployed over 1,700 search and rescue personnel on the ground, another 72 aircraft working in the air. They rescued over 5,200 people. They did over 3,000 evacuations, and also checked on another 3,000 or 4,000 people that were sheltering in their homes. Wow. That were isolated during the event.
And what would you say was kind of a standard rescue?
I think one of the common things were happening was people getting isolated in their homes as water came up very fast. You really have 3 different floods. You have the storm surge that comes initially from the hurricane. You have the flash flooding from the rainfall itself,
Yeah.
which we had areas that saw over 3 feet of rain in 2 days. And so the flash flooding became a huge problem. And then as all that water collected in the river basins and worked its way into the Atlantic Ocean, you had massive riverine flooding that followed.
Right, and weren't there some areas where the water then came back?
Yes, and that's where that flash flooding happened at first. And then as the water worked in the river basins from upstream, it flooded them even worse with large, massive amounts of water coming through. And in many cases, it was new records for river heights.
Yeah. What were some what were some of the heights of the rivers?
I know, I think the Cape Fear and other places were over 30 plus feet in areas, and normally Cape Fear River maybe 4 or 5 feet.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's nuts. And you said, we were talking earlier about some of the specific experiences that you've had. What was the one about the woman who put a light in her, what was that, like a night?
So we had an incident in Hurricane Matthew. We had just recently deployed night vision goggles to some of our resources, and fortunately they had them with them, and were working in an area in Fayetteville and Lumberton area and searching an area, and thankfully the night vision devices magnify any available light. So this person was over chest deep in water holding up their cell phone in the window, and that little bit of light got their attention, and they went able to reach into her home. They had to break into her house to get her out because of how much water was in the home.
So what time of night was this?
I don't know. I believe it was very late at night.
Okay, so it's late at night. She's stuck in her home, as in can't get out.
Chest deep of water.
Chest deep in water. Oh my gosh, and she's just putting a phone up against.
That's her only hope. I don't know if she didn't have cell signal or what, but she was unable to get help, and that little bit of light is what helped guide the rescuers to her.
Wow, that gives me goosebumps. Like
Yeah.
that was, she was just like, maybe somebody.
Extremely fortunate, and we're glad that we had the resources in the right place with the right training and the right equipment to effect that rescue.
Yeah, and on an emergency experience like that, where it's obviously everything is happening at once, what kind of shifts are people taking?
We generally try to work people 12-hour shifts, but our responders, they always go above and beyond, and there's many cases we had in Matthew where responders worked over 20 hours without any breaks, constantly pulling people out because of the number of folks that needed rescue. And that just goes to their drive and motivation to try to make sure that no one goes without help and no one's left behind. And that's really, by heeding evacuation warnings, not driving across flooded streets, we can minimize that impact and ensure the safety of our responders.
Yeah, because that's definitely something that I don't think is top of mind for people. They think, well, I'll weather it out. I'll be fine, I'm tough. But you're not thinking about all the people at risk.
Absolutely. When flooding happens, it really comes out of nowhere sometimes, and those things happen quickly, and it takes a lot of resources to affect things. And when you have such a large area of flooding, you may be cut off and not realize it. And a lot of folks thought they were in a better place than they were because it didn't flood like whatever hurricane. So many people have survived through so many storms that if I didn't flood during Floyd, I'll be fine. But every storm is different, and you have to be prepared to respond to that particular event, not just how past storms have impacted your family.
Yeah, and you're not just rescuing, I mean, you're rescuing children and pets and...
Children and pets. I think there's over 1,700 pets in Hurricane Florence that were rescued. Our numbers overall for rescues in Florence were 3.5 times Matthew, Hurricane Matthew.
Yeah, and when you guys are doing this training out here, you're going up and down like how deep is this river?
So in some places as shallow as a few feet, in most places it's 3 or 4 feet deep, which allows us to still operate the boats without damaging equipment, but also allows them to get the push in the river that they need to simulate a real flooding environment with natural hazards across the river that allows them to train and be prepared. And things they do here are not just learn how to deal in Swiftwater, but also learn how to deal with different emergencies. So you'll see them do different emergency procedures. If their motor stops working in the middle of a flooded area, if they have a puncture in their boat, how to safely navigate those issues to ensure that their crew can survive.
So on this kind of operation, or if you're out like a Hurricane Florence, for instance, and responding, what kind of costs are we talking about, like for this and that?
So one Swiftwater team runs about $20,000 a day.
Wait, what was that?
One Swiftwater team runs us about $20,000 a day.
Woo.
And then we had over 70 Swiftwater teams during Florence. Helicopters, they run somewhere in the $20,000 to $30,000 a day. And all of these things are required to be successful. the helicopters aren't just there to rescue people, they're also there to provide backup to our boats. So if our boats get in an emergency, then they have somebody that can come and help them.
Yeah.
So a lot of times they may be the only crew working in a large area.
Yeah, wow. So a few days in, all that kind of damage, that gets extremely costly.
Absolutely. We've already reimbursed over $2 million to public safety agencies who responded to Hurricane Florence.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us here today on the river.